The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. Today, our travels take us all the way overseas to the land of the United Kingdom. There we can find the one and only David Gaylard. David, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to finally be on here and catch up again as we meet up at LVO like we do every year, and it's good to be back here again.
Yeah, it's always good to see some familiar 40K faces and meet up in person. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting David, not only is he an amazingly talented Warhammer player, but he's also just a great dude. David is the reigning champion over the Southampton Super Major. He actually has 3 Super Major titles, which is the most for any singular person from the United Kingdom. And he was 4th in the world last year in ITC. So not too shabby of a resume there.
Yeah, thank you.
You've absolutely crushed it with Astra Militarum this past weekend, and I am here to unpack how. Today, we're going to talk about this episode in 2 parts. Part 1, we're going to talk about David, let you all introduce yourselves to him, let him introduce himself to you, get to know him, how he plays 40K, how he got to be such an accomplished 40K player. And then in part 2, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about Astra Militarum, the strategies he used, the list he used at the Southampton, how it works, how Astra Militarum is taking the world down by storm. That's going to be for subscribers on our Patreon. You can join at AOW40K.com. All right, everybody, we really appreciate your support. I'm going to let it all go to David now. David, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Obviously, I'm over the moon yesterday, and I after the weekend, and I also won the golden ticket to the Warhammer World Champs. So that'll be a really exciting event to play, and I believe it's November or something. So that'll be in
Atlanta. That's not even too far from me. I'm going to be there commentating, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it'll be great.
That's great. Well, congratulations again on your win. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, thanks. It's been that tournament was a nice win, but there was a much greater personal accomplishment in the tournament for me personally, and we can get into that later. I won't spoil it.
Okay, I'm definitely going to unpack that. Let's talk about kind of you as a person, as a player, though. Like, how long have you been playing 40K? How'd you get into it?
Yeah, so basically, I've been playing Warhammer since 9th edition started, more or less. And, I'm from New Zealand for people that don't know me. And so I was playing Warhammer on my farm that I grew up in with old, metal models, like the old Carnifex, with the talons out the front, off eBay, and playing on the ground bottle caps, picking up rocks from the farm to make boards with my friend, like basically as humdiggity of Warhammer as you could possibly do. And so that was when I was very young. And then, I didn't touch the game for a long time, and I played competitive esports for a long, long time at a very high level. And then when I moved to the UK, my best mate here now introduced me to the game after I pointed out a model on his desk that was a Demon Prince. And I was like, what is that? He's like, oh, it's Warhammer. And I was like, dude, people still play that game. And he said, yeah, there's a big competitive scene here. And I was like, my eyes just lit up when he said that. And I was like, okay, we got something to do here. And I've been hooked ever since. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. You see that a lot with people. I like to ask them that question, right? Like, how do you get started into Warhammer? Kind of get to know people. And a lot of people fall out of the hobby and kind of come back into it and decide to go very competitive with it. You actually had this esports background, though. I don't think I've actually heard someone come over from the esports side, aside from the late, great Jeff Robinson. So, like, what is that for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is very common in UK and EU, actually. And like, I think people would probably refer to me as one of the newer age players. So esports background, I play a lot on TTS, and the philosophy of practice and play is very different from probably some of the avant-garde players of Warhammer that have been exposed to a lot of the legacy elements of the game. For me...
You're talking about me right now?
No, well, you define yourself as you do. But, I think because the game has changed so much over 6th, 7th, 8th edition, different ways of playing. And, the largest change to the game has been Warhammer transforming from a game where information was shared on sub-forums and kept within very tight-knit teams, to a game where information is readily available. Like, the amount of content that is produced now compared to even 2 years ago or even a year ago, I feel like doubles in size every single year. And that transition is very similar to a game I played, Magic the Gathering, where People knew what the strongest decks were, the strongest combinations. Net decking was very typical and not frowned upon. And we're just going through that change and have been through that change in the last year for Warhammer, in my opinion. So I think for me, a lot of the concepts from, just take Magic the Gathering, for example, translate over to Warhammer really well, where I'm interested in knowing the best strategies, objectively coming to the conclusion about what the best combination of units and factions and combos to take, identifying broken parts of the game. By that I mean overpowered, for example, and trying to practice not for the sake of playing and enjoying the game, but to practice to become the best player, or to become a player of greater understanding about what I'm trying to accomplish in the game.
There's so much to unpack there. Wow. Yeah. I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just very excited to talk about it. So one of the things before there's so many things here. The first thing I want to talk about is what you said about how 40K right now is kind of like where Magic the Gathering was a few years ago. I've heard a lot of people say that in regards to 40K in relation to esports in general. Like now, like you said, there's a lot more content. Streaming is becoming regular. There's certain individuals or groups out there just pumping out content, traveling week to week to tournaments to stream it and bring it live. Is this like what you think the steps are to make Warhammer a more mainstream game? Do you think we're just on the right track?
I think I genuinely think, and I've myself and a few friends of mine have been undergoing some rapid changes recently. I genuinely think Warhammer is on the precipice of becoming a much, much, much larger game than it has ever been, or than people have really anticipated it to be. I was kind of on the precipice of that with Dota and Heroes of New Earth and Dota 2. I was like not semi-pro, but I was in sponsored team then, and I sort of saw the transition of that game turn into something that people can base their careers around. And a lot of the similar elements in Warhammer are now, for me, starting to appear. And I wouldn't be surprised if the game grows, twice. The tournament attendance is twice as large in 2 years' time, especially over here in the UK. It's, a lot of exciting things to come. We've got 10th edition coming out. This is crazy. 2 years ago, if I told you that the top 4 players in the ITC are all content creators, that you can go up to them, have a chat, pick their brains, and have access to their actual high-level gameplay thoughts, you would have probably laughed at me. And even 3 or 4 years ago, no one would have said that would have been true. But the amount of access of information that people have nowadays, and people like yourself and your organization, and other high-level players putting stuff out there, really enables players to push and compete and become better. And I think the quality of players on average is so much higher than what it used to be as well, because of that information and competitive nature. And there are a lot of competitive tendencies in Warhammer that are becoming second nature for people that I think previously didn't maybe exist. And it's really pushing the game to a state of maturity where we're setting ourselves up for doing bigger things.
I really couldn't agree more. It feels like the average player is a lot better, and it feels like there's an understanding of culture when you go to tournaments about how the game should be played that really wasn't there maybe 3, 4, even maybe 2 years ago, right before COVID. I think that's really positively shifted how the game is not only being played at the tournaments, but also being perceived by those kind of viewing it on the outskirts. And I'm really glad to see just like your outside perspective on it, because I'm in total agreement. And I'm really excited about it. I hope the future of Warhammer really does grow, obviously, but I think we are on the right trip as well.
Yeah. And, you're obviously a seasoned tournament competitor yourself, and I think that disillusion of tournaments being some place where you're going to get gotcha'd or you're going to have a bad player experience, that has been one of the big myths that I think the UK scene for sure has shaken recently, over the last 2 years. We've had an amazing transformation in the UK where tournament scenes are, places where people gather socially and have fun and come in with the expectation that all the games are played to a very high sporting level, and you're going to have fun, win or lose. You're going to have a great time because of the people that you're surrounded by. So we're extremely lucky to have that, and I hope that I know that's going to be the future for Warhammer, whether it's in the US, UK, Europe, going forward. But yeah. Good times ahead.
I know the joke is UK is 6 months ahead, but honestly, I think America's right there with you. I can't speak for every event, but generally speaking, when I do go to events, LVO, I went to Wars in Atlanta a few months back. I had the same experience, this really high-level, sporting, good vibe tournament the entire way through.
Yeah, and Las Vegas was a great example of that as well. I know there was some contention around the Sean Naden and Soli game, but like that was a great display of sportsmanship as well. Two guys with a lot on the line, extending the hand to each other, and you see stuff like that all the time. It doesn't just happen at the top tables; it happens everywhere over Warhammer, which is what makes the game so great. That's what keeps me in the game.
Right. It's the community. I mean, we always say that.
Yeah, the community. And I also find the game strategically very interesting, having played a lot of esports games that are quite similar. I've played all the range from Counter-Strike 1.5, 1.6, Source, CSGO, and then I've played other turn-based games competitively like Dota and whatnot like that. So I've played the spectrum of needing to be dexterously very fast versus having a strategic mindset. And Warhammer really is just, man, I'm getting old, but Warhammer is a game where you can apply your mind and you don't have to be at the apex of reactions and whatnot.
Right. The physical aspect is more an endurance test than like a reactive, sporty one.
It's a mindset as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It does bring me to the other thing I wanted to jump off of what you said earlier is that you said you don't really view the game in a way to, in your sense, have fun with it. You're trying to view it in a sense of just getting better and more being the sharpest competitor you can be. I totally appreciate that as one competitor to another. Like I always try to learn from my games and all that. But I also approach it with like, if I'm not having a good time, if I'm not having fun, what am I doing with it here? And I had personally, and I know a lot of competitors too, have maybe blurred those lines, lost the plot, stopped having fun in favor for chasing wins or trying to optimize their list or their army or whatever it might be. Do you suffer from that at all? Do you struggle, or like how do you make that divide?
Yeah, it's so interesting you ask that, because this is actually something I've struggled with a lot over my relationship with the game. Initially I came in with that mindset of, I defined my relationship and enjoyment of the game through the lens of my tournament results. And, I know you can relate to that. Every top player
can relate to that 100%.
And if I didn't win a tournament, I was unhappy with Warhammer, which at the level that you play Warhammer at the top level, it is an inherently unhealthy relationship, as I think Anthony Vanella has eloquently said. And to compete at the top levels, you ultimately have to have, for some duration of time, an unhealthy relationship with the game, in a sense that it is all-consuming to a certain extent, right?
I would say like maybe not unhealthy in the way where it's like a toxic relationship by definition, but I would say unhealthy in like it's an obsessive relationship.
Exactly.
You're consumed by it.
Yeah, it's difficult to hit the gym consistently, be a great partner, achieve great career goals, and be a top Warhammer player at the same time, right?
Just align your career with Warhammer. It's all I do.
Yeah, exactly. So for a long time I was chasing those big wins, and I remember when I won my first major. I remember when I won my first super major, of course. Things changed for me after I did that. But the most defining point of Warhammer for me was when I actually started the podcast with Vic VJ, who came second in the ITC last year, my very good friend. That's
fairly recent.
Yeah. So, we started it in November last year or something. So 40K Fireside podcast, where Vic and I, one of the two to the top four that, as I said, talk about the content and whatnot like that. We have a podcast that we do every couple of weeks where we talk about the meta and whatnot. But what that did was it really rapidly changed how I engaged with the game, because not only did I have a positive outlet in the game through tournament and competitiveness, I had a really positive outlet of the game by sharing my experiences with others and giving back to the community and helping people and providing advice from the top level content. So it kind of became a thing that no matter what I was doing, I was winning in a certain sense, so I could never really be unhappy in that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, you would know this as well. I mean, being content creator as well, you must have felt that same thing to an extent, right?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, your relationship with the game really changes when you get into the content creation aspect, because it's no longer you're playing for yourself and just your ability to prove to yourself how good you are, whatever it might be. You're playing almost with a higher purpose of trying to teach people and help the game grow and share this hobby with more and more people. So if that's kind of how you're viewing it now, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's kind of even so that would probably would be what I would say my midpoint in transition. But recently, I've really adopted such a different philosophy of how I enjoy the game. I was really struck by Alexander Fennell at LVO recently, when Alexander Fennell knocked out my teammate Vic at LVO, and they had an excellent game. And Alex just said, "Look, I've got to get on my flight, tomorrow or something, right?" So the guy, Alex knocks out Vic, and then she's just like, "Oh, I'm just going to go home," I was just like, "Man, there's something there that I'm missing," And what I realized is that I no longer needed to prove myself as a player by winning tournaments and doing well and prove that I'm one that I can hang with the best of them, because I realized that I'd already achieved that to a certain degree. And actually, the thing that mattered most to me in the game now was just playing to play well. And I said this going into the tournament with my team, my new team, and I said, win or lose, I'm just going to try and play my best. And if I play my best, then I can be really happy. And that's kind of what Alexander Fennell gave off to me. And then a lot of people have been supporting me, helping me develop as a player like that. So, I just take it one game at a time, just enjoy the game for the game's sake, and never take a victory as given, which is a lesson I learned at LVO, that's for sure. I had a great game against Chase Chamberlain that taught me a huge lesson about overconfidence. And just enjoy every game of the moment. You've got 3 hours there to have fun with your opponent. If you're playing well, then, and you still lose, then as long as you can reflect on that and become even better, then, that's even better, right? But
I really have said it better myself, David. Like, seriously, it sounds a little cheesy hearing it, like, right back to you, especially maybe in podcast form, but genuinely, like, it kind of sounds like you transcended the ego part to 40K, which is a lot of people get stuck there and potentially forever, for years.
Yeah, and look, I would say if you're listening to this right now and you're in a similar situation, it was literally me. I was like, man, I got to win. I got to win my first super major. Like, I won't be respected until I win my first super major. I won't be good until I win, this or that.
Consistently. If you're a 5-1 player who's like feels like they can't break that ceiling, or even like a 2-3 player who's been at it for years and just can't seem to get better. And this applies to everybody.
Yeah. Like, here's the thing though, is that here's what I realized is that actually, when you change from that philosophy of I must win the tournament to I just need to play better, like every game I just need to play my best and play better and keep improving as a player, winning will naturally come as a consequence of that process, and you will actually perform better than as if you were trying to chase the tournament win right from the get-go. Just in the moment, in the game, focusing on the game, playing well, reflecting. That process is so much more predictable and well balanced.
And that's really what we try to teach at Art of War. Like in our war room and with my personal coaching that I've given clients, it's, I don't try to just give them here's the winning list and here's the way to play the winning list and now you go into tournaments. It's a process. 40K is a skill as a game. You can learn the skill over time, much like cooking. I can give you a recipe. You're not going to be able to be Gordon Ramsay. You learn. And through that process, if you don't look at it through the resultist lens of I need results right now, my goal is to go from 3-2 to 4-1. That's just a metric. Like, if you go to every game giving it your best shot, trying to do points projections and trying to really learn the tactics and trying to apply the knowledge that you are learning from game to game to game and watching all the content that David's saying is out there, then you will get better by definition. And you'll feel a lot better with your relationship about the game too. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And, for those people that are looking to get better, surrounding yourself with the right people is a huge part of that. So coming up as a player, I was around Team Dice Down, and I was very fortunate to get picked up that team and brought into that family because it was the premier powerhouse of UK. How many years has Dice Down come second to Art of War, right? Feels like basically
right where you belong.
Exactly. So surrounding myself with players that were able to give me honest feedback, not only about how I was doing in terms of sportsmanship, ability to play, technicalities, but about the wider tournament format, which players to think about, and then provide me that support structure around, hey, you're going to round 6. Do you want to have a phone call? Like, just chat through your secondary, something like that. That's when you can really push yourself from. I think that's, for me, the biggest differentiator between someone who's consistently going X and 1 or maybe making the quarterfinals to someone who is I don't want to say this, but for lack of better words, a serial winner, someone that will consistently win. is not only their game, but being surrounded by people that will enable them to keep growing as players.
That's true, and that's why you typically do see winners consistently win, because they have found like their group of people who just bounce ideas off of them over and over and over again. It's like a niche they find, and the way you find this is not like some crowd or some clique that you're not a part of. Like if you go to tournaments and you make friends, that's literally what we have all done in our process, because we all sucked at 40K one point, and
yeah, for sure.
And you go to tournaments and you make friends, and your friends might suck too. You probably find people relatively in your skill range. You get better together. You talk about ideas and bounce ideas off each other with the goal of getting better every single game, instead of the goal being go 4-1. And if the goal is to get better and your friends are aligned with the goal of getting better, you genuinely help each other get better. Look at all that. A couple years down the road, doesn't even have to be years. We had Sam Precipio. He was like winning super majors after 9 months of playing 40K.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I'm really glad you added that part about, alignment of goals. Not everyone engages in the game to win tournaments, and I think that's a really cool part about the game, is that there's such a wide spectrum of interaction with the game. You've got people that really love the hobbying side. You've got people that really love the competitive side. It's like bottle caps and professional painted, right? And then you've got all those people in between that interact with the game. But finding yourself around common people that will relish in your success as well as their own is really good. In real life, meeting people is one thing, but it goes without saying that I think, for lack of better words again, quote, my generation of players, unquote, tabletop simulator being the absolutely defining theme between people or new players that have come up and done really well really quickly. The benefit of that program is that you can play a lot of games really quick, and you can be it's very easy to find a community of players and bounce ideas off one another. You've got Discord channels and everything like that. The Out of War Discord channel, I'm assuming, and everything, right, where you can slot in, find games, and meet people really quickly and progress as a player.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to transition this talk, although it's been great, a little bit more to like you as a player and how you've kind of grown within the sphere of 40K. So I've known you, David, for a few years now, and you've always been killing people with Tyranids. And you even started out as a Tyranid lover, like way back in the day.
Yep, that's true. Yeah.
So I seem to recall this episode being about Astra Militarum, and they shoot Tyranids, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
Why not? I guess why the sudden switch, but what has the transition in playstyle and your approach to the game been with all that?
Yeah, so I think, initially when I started out playing, I wanted to play, I made a decision very early on to compete and do well. I wanted to play what I thought was the strongest army, and I played LVO 2 years ago, top 8, played against the lovely Alexander McDougall, playing GSC on that match there, and I was playing Crusher Stampede. And then, Tyranid book came out after that, so I stayed with them because they were obviously really good. But what I've done is, it's no surprise that I've stuck with armies that were going to perform well. So after Tyranids, I played Thousand Sons and Demons. And then recently, after that meta, which was basically LVO, Southampton being more or less the first tournament in the UK, I'm playing Astra Militarum. So for me, I don't really have any kind of lore or allegiance to a particular army, or I've never been, I really love this, I would never play that kind of person. For me, it's always like, how does this army perform? Does it have the depth that I, as a player, could work out to become, someone who could really win with it over and over again? And Astra Militarum, I thought, was a good example of that. Yeah.
So it's all just about like raw potential, almost like computer science, like which army will give you the best chance at winning, irrespective of the lore, your personal appeals to the army, or even like your approach to using it on the table. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. I'm actually a senior data scientist as well, so it's funny that you
are a robot. Okay.
But I think that might make some people cringe, right? They might go that philosophy of like meta chaser or something like that. But that's where the reality of being a competitive player kind of comes home. And I think the beauty of what I said is that I enjoy the game for the game's sake. I don't necessarily only get enjoyment out of the game because of hobbying. We could be playing with bottle caps and I would still love the game just because of the way that the game is designed and the way that it flows. Is it's a beautiful game to play. I kind of have dipped in and out of competitive esports games, but this one is just consistently kept me interested. So I think that's a really high bar.
As someone who's played 40K for going on 20 years this year, I can really appreciate your love for the actual gameplay here. And honestly, like I view 40K very similarly. Like I maybe not. I have my personal factions that I like. I don't really mess with Astro Militarum, actually, as ironic as that is here. But you know, largely speaking, I played every single faction over time, and I get it. And I'm not here to judge people. No one in this audience is. Everyone can enjoy 40K their own way. You want to play super competitive, totally fine. Some people want to just paint the models, whatever.
Yeah.
What I'm find interesting though about you is like I have like a play style. I'll even call it out right here. I like to play defensive, reactive, pretty janky, quick stuff. I don't do great when I am given a bowling ball to just run straight at people. I'll try to overcomplicate it because that's just my nature.
Yeah.
In your case, do you have your data science background, your fairly competitive esports background? Does any of that lead you in some specific way of wanting to play Warhammer? And then do you struggle not to play that way?
Yeah, so I think playstyle is definitely a divisive term. I think, and I think some people would argue that playstyle is not a thing. But I think when the reality comes to it, you as a player, everyone knows that they shine or perform better in certain situations. So I think playstyle is a thing. But what I particularly lean on is I like to discover objective truths about the game. So I am someone historically in the previous season that grinds a lot of reps. And when I talk about a lot of reps, I mean, guys, like I think I was over 60-0 in practice games in my internal team with Leviathan Tyranids at one point, and I was 39-0 and back to back across like 4 tournaments with Leviathan Tyranids last year. I discovered so many objective truths about how to play the game through sheer grind that playstyle for me didn't become a thing. And that as a player is something that I lean on a lot because I don't think I'm necessarily a very good intuitive player at the game, as perhaps that might sound bizarre, but things that players see in the game, I don't necessarily pick up as quick as other players. And for better or for worse, that's just how I need to understand the game. So I like to understand the game through raw logic about this is, these scenarios, these deployments, these armies. This is the most objective way to play. And that's kind of how I surround myself with a impenetrable like wall of logic about, okay, this is right. And, it's a very hard process to go through because you need to be surrounded by the right people that are at your level that will contribute to that wall of logic as well.
Can you give me some examples of what you would classify as an objective truth about 40K? Is it like movement, like movement, like move 6, or is it more intangible?
So here's a really good example. Yeah. When I played Leviathan Tyranids, we played 2 bricks of 9 warriors. Now, against Hail of Doom, I would never show, and against most shooting armies, I would never show more than 1 brick of warriors. That was the objective truth I came to. So you never ever break the golden rule of showing 2 bricks of warriors where one is buffed and one is unbuffed. Even if you split the buffs, you never do it. So that's a rule that I stuck by for a long time. Astra Militarum, I have some rules there where it's where it's like you can redeploy 3 units. So I always have a rule about how I deploy. So I'll always have 2 forward deploys, 1 that can go back into strat reserve. So if I go second, I redeploy 1 into strat reserve and 2 back. Or if I go first, I put 3 forward and have 5 on the line. So rules like that where it just simplifies the game. If you spend 10, 15 minutes to think about it and map it out, you just go, these are the rules. And when there are nuances when you play the very, very toughest of games, but those rules you have to rely on, be like, okay, that's just the best way to do it. Or, deployment is a huge one where you can come to, very, very, very concrete ideas about how you should deploy for the most part. And that saves you a lot of time and second guessing that ultimately is going to breed a better result over the long term, I think.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. And you're using kind of objective truths here as like a way to simplify experiential learning over tons of data. Like, you get tons of reps, you understand, okay, this is how the warriors go. This is deployment is muscle memory now.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I wouldn't describe either of those as necessarily play styles. And like you said, some people may hypothesize it doesn't even exist, but what does absolutely exist is a person's personal preferences, right? So like,
right.
Would you consider yourself a more aggressive player or a more defensive player? Is a great way to simplify it down.
Yeah, I look, if anything, last year got me the reputation as probably one of the most aggressive players in the UK, I think. Yeah. I mean, with Leviathan, I was I was extremely aggressive, but it was measured, of course. You can't let anyone
not ruthless, brainless aggression. It's
course,
type. Mm.
contrary to some opinions. But with T-Sons and Flamers, it was an extremely defensive playstyle. It took me a long time to learn that I just need to build my castle, and as long as no one can break my castle, then I sit back here, and never leave an opening, and then it should be locked out. And that's actually very similar to Astra Militarum, I think, in a lot of ways, is that you build your list and you build your strategies around denying people the opportunity to come and bully you and come and mess up your castle. And then as long as you could properly activate your units after that, then you should be in the driver's seat for the most part.
So the way you build your Crusher Stampede list is obviously super different to how you build your Thousand Suns list. And both are kind of, I don't want to say obvious in a sense, but the application of lots of monstrous creatures is fairly straightforward. Whereas Thousand Suns, definitely not an obvious army. They're the opposite. They have a million options, and it's on you to figure out how to put them together. So the learning curve to those two armies is not only different in elevation, like one is steeper than the other, it's also in different directions. So how do you process that? Like, what is the approach for, okay, I'm going to meta hop to what I perceive as the best army in the game right now, and I'm going to learn it, although I don't even know where to start because it's a totally different skill set from the last thing I was just playing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it's not. There's no one complete answer, and I totally get what you're saying now. Is that, and it took me a long time to when I was playing T-Sons and Flamers, not to pull the pin, if you know what I mean, like not to all in someone turn one if I've got an opening, right? Like, okay, don't do that.
For an aggressive player, I think if I'm playing aggressive T-Sons, I'm taking the Umberlific Crystal and Cult of Duplicity. I'm teleporting 20 Terminators in your face turn one, seeing what you do about it. And obviously that isn't even the strategy with T-Sons.
Yeah, well, some games it is. Fair enough. You teleport the two characters in the Terminators some games, but I'm very good at trading and understanding, like, this needs to line up against that, etc. But the truth is that it's not optimal for most players to enjoy to play and compete like I would, or like another top player would, because there's no shortcut to learning how to play an army that has a completely different play style. There's some things you can do. So one thing I'd recommend is finding someone who has a lot of experience on that army. So T-Sons and Flamers, there was a guy called Jean-Michael Jean, or Liam VSL, as he's known online. Very good Team Belgium WTC player. And I thought, what is the army I want to bring to Las Vegas? And I contacted Liam and said, you know what, run me through the list. Can I get a game against you? And then, bounced ideas off him. So, what's the saying? It's, standing on the shoulders of giants, I could see further. And that's the quickest way to bootstrap your players, to learn off other people.
Yeah, I think learning off of other people is really, that's how you bounce ideas off each other. If it's just one person, you're never going to go anywhere with it. And that's a huge accelerant to getting better. Do you find, though, like you keep referencing this, like this really strong core group of people, which is exactly what all the other top players have as you get better. Do you find that you suffer a little bit from groupthink? Like maybe you guys just missed an idea about a matchup, or you were theoretically wrong about which army was best in the metagame and you over-tech for something? Or do you think you have a good foundation to get around that?
Yeah, man, this is such a good point. This is a transition I think any top player makes, and that is shifting from relying on your friends and people that are better than you to make your decisions for you, and then becoming a player that owns your own decisions. And that, it sounds bizarre, but that's happened to me when I was kind of early on. I was surrounded when I initially joined my former team Dice Down. There was some situations where I was like, should I do this? Should I do that? And they were like, no, definitely do this. And back in my head, I was like, I'm pretty sure I shouldn't do that. And I ended up losing some pretty crucial games because of that. And I realized that whilst being in a team is, for the most part, extremely beneficial, it can become a bit of an echo chamber. So you have to be confident enough to go on your own and say, this is actually the right way to do it. So you can't play vicariously through other players all the time. You need to be able to define what you think is good for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's finding your own voice is a good way to put it. But yeah, being able to be confident in your own ideas, I think, is a huge part to actually getting better at this game as well.
Yeah, it's like, for example, at this point, meta chase this, meta chase that. I realized if I think something's really good, I can go to a tournament and win with it. Like, I will be the meta. It's like the meta is out there somewhere, but you can also define what the meta is by performing well with something as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. So bringing it up back to the guard here, the meta is wide open right now. Arcs of Omen is wild. There's if you look at the results from Meta Mondays and stuff on Reddit, top 8s are 8 different factions sometimes. What's winning? Yes. It's Orcs are winning tournaments in America. Dark Angels are winning tournaments. Custodians are winning tournaments. Astronauterium's not putting up the wins that we expect them to, but obviously, David, you've proven that wrong. And GSC are supposedly the best army in the game. So how did we land on Astronauterium?
Yes. Oh, man. Actually, it was probably in Vegas because after Las Vegas, I was deciding, what army I'm going to try and not buy into, but invest enough time to learn that will have longevity to it where I can perform well. And it was actually probably a couple of out of water guys that were like, yeah, Guard is super strong. Like Anthony was like, oh, Guard is so good. And I was like, okay, well, it seems pretty consistently that people are saying okay, Guard is good. So I was like, okay, I'll invest in that. But I've been through a real list building process with Guard. I really like to start with just kind of the most data sheets and bully people with strong data sheets and identifying strong data sheets in the book, and then starting with that. So my first lists were Lehman Russ, 7 Lehman Russes, and 3x3 mortars, and 10 Casicans the key, and
2,000 divided by guns.
Yeah, just super one-dimensional, and what a man. I was just about to not play Guard, in all honesty, as well, because there are some serious flaws in the book. The faction has some very, very clear weak points, but the book at the same time is very deep. There are a lot of options, and the options that are available are not necessarily fully apparent until you play a lot with them and explore them. So it's been a real list building journey for me, starting all the way from 7 Russes, going down to all the way down to 2 Russes, 60 troop up to 100 troop, back down to 40 troop and stuff, and eventually just through pure experimentation and wanting to create a list that is well-rounded, which is something I just try and do with all my lists, have a well-rounded list that has no clear weak points. Eventually I landed on the list that I won with at Southampton.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The new Astromilitarum Codex, I've only been on the receiving end of it twice, been absolutely tabled by Kazakins and Lehman Russes, and it's been brutal. I don't know what the weak points are. I'm eager to find out. I'm super excited to see what your list is if it's not just 2,000 points divided by guns. In part 2, we're going to go through your list and how it all works. But why don't you leave it off with what you actually took to this tournament to get first place?
Yeah, so I was playing Astromilitarum, Born Soldiers. I was playing Lord Solar Leontis. I was playing Deathcore of Krieg Marshal, the 35-point character. I had Grand Stratagem, so 5 up gain a CP. The KD Command Squad with the Finial, Warlord Trade for Redeploy, and the Ogren Bodyguard with the 2-up save. I had 1 Tank Commander with Executioner Plasma Cannon and 2 Plasma Sponsons and the Las Cannon. I had 4 units of 10 KD Shock Troop, 1 Melter and 1 Plasma Gun, and a Drum-Fed Shotgun on the Sergeant. Then I had 3 units of Cassican, all with very nuanced loadouts, but 1 had Ignore Heavy Penalty, lots of volley guns, and the Barbican's Key. I had 3x3 mortars. Then I had 2 Lehman Russes, with 1 with the same loadout as a tank commander, and 1 with specifically no sponsons and plasma. Had 3x3 mortars, and then 1 Chimera, and that managed to get me all the way to the end.
Honestly, I mean, aside from the obviously insane 30 Kazakin, it looks like a pretty balanced, well-rounded guard list with nothing to assuming going on. I'm really curious how this has unlocked the key, what the tactics are, what those nuances between those Kazakin units and those tech plasma sponsors on the rest are. These are the things we're going to unpack in part 2. For patrons joining us, you can actually find the whole episode on AOW40k.com. That's where we're going to break down the strategy, the tactics, all the good stuff. We'll see you over there. Your support means the world to us. We can't produce the show without you, and we'll catch you there. But wait, before I forget, David actually has his own podcast, The Fireside. I've been listening to it. Him and Vic do an amazing job. Dave, you want to talk about that really quick?
Yeah, well, the 40K Fireside podcast, hosted by Vic and myself, the two top ITC competitors. And if you listen to that, you'll know that I also have 2 units of 3 Armored Sentinels and 1 Scout Sentinel on my list. But you can catch us there. But we'll run through the list, in its depths and complexities in the next part.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me, David. It's been a blast. I'm super excited to go through it. Listeners, we'll catch you all in part 2. Join us on AOW40K.com while David walks us through how he shot everybody with Astra Militaire.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.